So we're going to look at the tweak menu and also the input and output and mix controls as well in this video. So we know the input control is going to control the input amount which is coming into the plugin, therefore into the preamp style, which we've already looked at. And you'll see that I've got this playing on the master here. But when we play through here, let's bring the mix down a bit. We get these kind of lights that are going to light up here telling us what kind of level we have coming in. So green, we're going to be kind of dealing with a kind of safe level without any distortion. And if we're working in the clean mode, we kind of want to keep things like that. So it kind of starts going into the yellow as well. So it's okay to have things green and occasionally reaching the yellow. Then if we boost that up, I'm going to bring down my output. Now we're occasionally going into the red there. So really that's not particularly desirable when we're in the clean mode. But as we discovered earlier, we may want to use the solid state or the tube mode to create some kind of analog richness and saturation. So that can work to create some nice kind of tonal changes and saturation when we drive that input, as we discovered earlier. Okay, so the output control is going to be an overall amplitude and level control for the output of SuperPlate. So it's going to include the dry signal coming through and the reverb signal as well. And finally, we have the mix control, which I'm sure is one we're all used to, which allows us to blend between the dry signal and the wet signal. Now, sometimes you may want to have this 100% wet. So if we were using this on an auxiliary, so let's choose those channels there. We'll send those to a bus, and let's just copy SuperPlate across to the bus. I'll just bypass this one here. So in this case, we'd have this 100% wet generally, and then we'd use these bus controls to pick out sounds to send to the reverb. And that would give us the benefit of having a kind of coherent space to work with. So in that case, we'd have the mix control all the way up. Alternatively, we could use SuperPlate on individual channels and then use the mix control to blend between the dry and the wet signal. Let me just show you a really cool feature on all the Soundtoys plugins. In fact, if we hold down Control and Option and we click on this mix control, but let's take that off again. Well, this is how you can turn it on and off basically. So Control, Option, click on and off, but let's lock it halfway. And now if we move to different presets, this mix control is not going to change. So if we were to undo that, take it off again, see the mix control is now changing once again. Now there's no change. That's quite useful because it means we can audition different reverb programs with the same mix control or mix level dialed in essentially. Okay, so let's dive in and have a look at the tweak menu. So I'm just going to mute that channel and put SuperPlate back on the master. And let's open up the tweak level here. So the tweak button is located down the bottom left of this main kind of panel here, and it opens up some additional features here. And generally these are going to be ones that aren't going to be so kind of immediately required as the main features, which is quite nice because generally when you're using it, you can just use it with that nice streamlined interface. But for the tweakers, you know, that's what's called the tweak menu, you can go in and really kind of push the sounds a little bit more. Now we know about the modulation rate down here and how it corresponds to modulation here, but let's have a look at this output EQ here. Now, as we've kind of heard from the plate reverb sounds we've been creating, they're pretty big and, you know, kind of full frequency, and, you know, sometimes they're in danger of taking over a mix a little bit unless you kind of tame them. And that's why it's very common to use EQ alongside reverb, especially very dense plate reverb. So it's very common to remove certain frequencies and possibly boost certain frequencies to get the reverb sitting where it needs to sit. Now the low and high filters within this output EQ are controlled from the main panel here. And we kind of talked about those earlier. Now, what we can actually do from within the tweak menu is change the slope of these filters. So if I just bring this in a little bit, we can choose from a 6 dB per octave slope, 12 or 24, and you can see how that affects the steepness of the slope there. Then we can bring that into taste. So we can decide how much of the frequency range we want to affect down in those low frequencies by adjusting the slope. And that's the same for the high frequencies as well, as you can see there. Now, in addition to these filter parameters here and the slopes, we have this 2-band EQ here as well. Now, ordinarily you'd use the first band here to kind of work in this kind of low to lower mid range, and then the second band to work in the kind of upper mids towards the higher frequencies. So you've got a lot of flexibility in terms of what you can achieve. So we can simply move these around by dragging left and right, as you've just seen me do. What we can also do is hold down Control, drag up and down, and we can define Q, or the bandwidth of this slope. So you could do things like, say if you had a very annoying resonance there, you choose to have a very steep cut followed by a broad boost, which is quite a frequent thing to do when you're EQing. So that was Control and drag up and down to change the bandwidth. Now, in addition, we have the ability to switch off the EQ and bring it in and out. Now, one thing just to be totally clear, these two parametric EQ controls are actually output EQ, so they're working on the output of the reverb, but actually these filter controls are working on the input, but they're kind of housed in the same place just for ease. Okay, so before we look at this auto decay parameter here, we're just going to have a look at the stereo controls. Now, first of all, we have a width control. Now, this allows us to determine the stereo width of SuperPlate. Now, the original plate reverbs were summed to mono at the input, and that was the case for Little Plate as well. Whereas SuperPlate is a true stereo in, stereo out reverb device. So in this case, the position of sounds within the stereo field are going to be respected within the reverb. So if you had a sound pan to the left, it's also going to have the reverb coming more from the left as well. So that means if you have a mono input coming into SuperPlate, you can get a nice rich stereo reverb as a result. That is when the width control is all the way to the right. But if we actually bring that to the left, we can create a mono reverb. Now, in isolation like that, the mono reverb doesn't necessarily sound as impressive as it does in stereo, but often in a mixed context, mono reverb can be very, very useful because reverb can take up a lot of space in a mix. So having the ability to actually kind of reduce the amount of space that takes up in terms of the stereo field can really help you position that reverb so it doesn't take over too much. Now, in addition to this, we have the ability to, say, have it mono, but then pan left or right. Or we can still have it stereo, but panned left and right as well. So these two controls are going to be very powerful for allowing you to position sounds within the stereo field. And you can use this, especially the width control here, to actually, again, create front-back perspective. Because if you have a sound which is mono, it's going to generally feel like it's coming from further away. We can actually test this. So this is in stereo. So it feels like it recedes in the speakers a little bit. Now, we're doing this on everything, which is maybe not the best way to demonstrate this. So let's try this on the drums. So just focus on this reverb. Let's bring up the pre-delay. So listen to it in stereo. And then focus on the sense of space that's created when we bring that to mono. So now the reverb really feels like it's behind the drums. Now it feels like it's coming from the same space. And then used in conjunction with the filters and the pre-delay, we can really increase that sense of front-back perspective. Now, if we were, say, panning a sound to the left, we can again kind of increase that perception by panning the reverb as well. So lots of flexibility when using, some of these controls in conjunction. Okay, so we'll carry this on in the next video where we're going to have a look at the auto decay feature here. So in this video, we covered some of the tweak controls here. We talked about the modulation, which we've already looked at. We looked at the EQ. So remember, these controls here, these two filters are going to be related to the filters on our main display here. And from down here, we can move them around, which is going to be reflected up here. And we can also change the slope by clicking on here. And then we have this parametric EQ, which we can drag up and down, and we can use control to change the Q, drag left and right, I should say, to change the position within the frequency range. Then we had the stereo control to allow us to make the reverb mono or completely stereo, and to kind of pan the reverb as well. Okay, so now we've covered these tweak parameters. Next up, we're going to have a look at this auto decay feature. So I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.